In this video, I will show you different ways you can use the Literacy Center of Expertise Phonics Stories 31 through 40. The suggested activities have been adapted from ESL for All. I will show you the activities with an example book, but you can use these ideas with any of the 10 stories. As literacy learners need to interact with books multiple times, this video will show you different foci for each time you interact with a phonics story. I will show you a few examples of how you can use oral language, read the story together, demonstrate that vowels in the English language have a short and long sound, and thus can be spelled in a variety of ways, and finally, how to practice recognizing high-frequency words. So let's get started. With this book, Sleeping Well, the first thing you could do is look at the pictures and make predictions about what is happening. This is where you can model and guide students' thinking. For example, I see she is in bed and not sleeping. I wonder why. As you go through the first section of the book, you can connect to students' personal experiences with this problem. You can ask, do you have trouble falling asleep? Do you use your phone in bed? You can also discuss the solutions in the story. In this story, her friend tells her to take a warm bath, keep her phone outside of her room, and not drink coffee before bed. It helps. What else helps you sleep well? Finally, when you're finished listening to each page, you can check for understanding in a few different ways. You can check more difficult or abstract vocabulary. For example, so what is a routine? What is her new bedtime routine in this story? You can then support students to retell the story in their own words, as opposed to just reciting it verbatim. This will help students solidify not only their understanding, but to help them build oral communication and vocabulary. For example, to practice retelling, I would start by asking students 3 questions one at a time. You can model first for students, then they can take turns asking and answering each question in pairs. Who was in the story? Emma and her friend. What was the problem? Emma has trouble falling asleep. What is the solution? Emma asks her friend for help, and her friend gives her ways to change her bedtime routine. Then students can use the closed sentences to try and put the pieces together and retell the story in their own words. To recap, here are a few ways you can use the oral language section of the book. You can use the pictures to make predictions and encourage reading for understanding, connecting problems and solutions in each story to students' lives. Finally, before moving on to the text, you can check for understanding by asking students to confirm overall understanding and support them to retell the story in their own words. Now that you have listened to the book, you can focus on reading the story. In this stage of reading development, you can focus on developing your students' abilities to think about what they are reading and self-monitor for understanding. For example, at the end of each sentence, have your students pause and ask themselves, do I understand what I read? If they don't, tell them to look at the picture and reread the sentence again. If they still don't understand, support them in thinking about why they don't. Ask your students, why don't you understand? Is it a problem with reading the letters or the meaning of the word? This will help them develop the skills to think about their reading, but also how to ask for help. For example, on this page, Emma's friend asks her, do you think these are good ideas? Maybe your student can decode the word idea, but doesn't understand the meaning. In this case, they can ask for help by saying, "I don't understand the word ideas. What does it mean?" Focusing on self-monitoring at this level will help build independence and enable students to target their own needs better. To recap, in this section, the focus is on building reading strategies and developing students' abilities to monitor their own understanding of text. At this stage of learning, students are working towards independence and have built a small toolbox of ways they can problem solve for themselves. If you want more ideas, watch the previous instructional video for suggested ways to use this section of the phonics stories to practice reading fluency and decoding accuracy. These stories have been designed with a whole approach in mind. Now that you understand the story and have read the text to match, you have context for focusing on long and short vowel sounds and their respective spelling patterns. Every word in English has 3 forms: meaning, sounds, and spelling. For students to learn spelling patterns, they need to be able to connect something new with something they already know. For example, when students know the word for bed and understand what it means, its pronunciation is stored in long-term memory. Once students are reading books in this phonics series, the last 10 of our 40 books, they are also able to pull apart the word bed and hear the individual sounds. B, E, D. Now they are able to practice attaching the word's printed sequence or spelling to the sounds. They can do this because the other intersecting skills are already in place. Students can listen to the word bed, and you can ask them, "What sound did you hear? E or E? How do you spell the sound? Is it with the letter E or EA?" Let's check. You can go through each review slide like this to focus on the spelling pattern of each sound. You could also ask students about the other option on each slide. If this says bed, what would B-E-A-D sound like? To come at the same skill from a different approach. To recap, in this section of the resource, you can help your students further develop their abilities to orally distinguish sounds and connect those sounds to spelling patterns. The letters they see with their eyes and sounds they hear in a word will be processed together and stored in the brain as a unit. Once you have practiced these skills on their own, you can return to the whole story and apply them to reading in context, as it is important to not overload your learners to ensure they can make lasting spelling pattern connections. The last focus of this series is to help students build a bank of words that they can recognize right away, otherwise known as sight words. Some sight words, like students' names, have meaning to them, but many high-frequency words in English are harder to connect to anything personal. These words that come up often in texts are best practiced in a variety of ways. After you reread the story a few times to give your students exposure and context, you can practice them on their own. The review page at the end of each story has the words with audio, so you can read and listen. After. Few. Then you could read the story again and circle the sight words you see. I see the word after, A-F-T-E-R, and the word few, F-E-W. Finally, you could have students practice spelling sight words as a class or in pairs to help them move these words to long-term memory. They can use the routine of read, cover, write, check to help move these words to long-term memory. To recap, using the whole approach, you can practice sight words in isolation, Then review them in targeted activities in context to help increase speed of recognition and overall reading fluency. The goal is that students will recognize these words automatically as they have been retained in long-term memory. Having a large number of stored sight words will enable quick and accurate reading where students are free to focus on meaning making from the text. In this video, we have seen how our phonics stories are designed in 4 parts. They can be used to focus on oral language development and developing thinking strategies, how to use reading strategies to solve words and focus on reading fluency and comprehension, how to recognize spelling patterns using a whole part whole approach, and how to build a word bank of high-frequency words that students will recognize automatically. To end, here are a few ways you could extend the books to focus on putting all the pieces together. Check out all 10 stories on the Literacy Center of Expertise website, and stay tuned for accompanying workbooks for all 40 phonics stories coming late 2023.